webinar with philosophers at Jaipur, Professor Daya Krishna. The objective behind having a discussion on this topic is to explore and revisit the rich philosophical endeavors of our ancestors and in particular by Professor Daya Krishna. We are fortunate to have in our midst Chairperson Professor R.C. Sinha, Indian Council for Philosophical Research, eminent scholar, of applied philosophy. Professor Kumar Ratnam, Member Secretary, Indian Council for Philosophical Research. Professor K.L. Sharma, our guardian and ex-head, senior most person of our department, and friend of Professor Daya Krishna. Professor Asha Mukherjee, Vishwa Bharati, eminent scholar of logic, ethics, feminism, and philosophy of Professor Daya Krishna. I would also like to welcome Professor Daniel Ravel, Tel Aviv University. He is an eminent scholar of Indian contemporary philosophy. Recently, he published a wonderful book on Professor Daya Krishna from Bloomsbury. Now, I would like to request Professor Arvind Vikram Singh, head of our department, to formally welcome our guest.
Ron, respected Professor R.C. Sinha sir, person ICPR, Professor Asha Mukherjee ma'am, Vishwa Bharati, Shanti Niketan, Professor Daniel Rave sahab from Tel Aviv University, Israel, my colleagues from the other universities, scholars and friends. On the behalf of the Department of Philosophy, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur, I extend my warm welcome and greeting to all of you in today's study circle webinar. It is a matter of great happiness for us that our department has been home bhumi of eminent professors and philosophers and scholars of the philosophy. Professor P.T. Raju, one of the earlier exponents of the comparative philosophy of our founder hedge. Professor Daya Krishna, Pandit Khadgnath Mishra, Professor Ramchandra Gandhi, Professor Vishambar Pahi, Professor R.S. Bhatnagar nourished and developed the traditional philosophical reflection in the department. Also associated with the department were legendary Professor G.C. Pandey, Shri Yasdev Shalya, Padma Shri Mukund Lach, who added the intensity and diversity of philosophical thinking in the department. The topic for the webinar has been conceived in order to introduce to the world of the philosopher and philosophy scholars and the rich philosophical tradition of Jaipur, an academic philosopher based in the department. The name of Dayaji had become synonymous with the department. This was so because he made Jaipur a seat of philosophizing through his radical and unconventional way of thinking. For an instance, he asked radical questions like, is Nyaya a realist philosophy or the non-Advaitic beginning of Advait? The same gave birth to long line of debate in the circle of scholars of philosophy, and thus this is the flow of thought. I remember the year 1985 when I came to Jaipur as a PG student. There I envisioned a program of dialogue between Pandit trained in Sanskrit tradition and academic scholar of philosophy trained in analytical tradition. The tradition of dialogue or samvad summarizes the philosophical pursuit of Dayaji. Dayaji is very comprehensive philosophical insight coupled with prolific writing skill left us almost 200 papers and more than 20 books of the philosophy. Therefore, it is hard to task to understand and build a summary of Dayaji's philosophy. His philosophical position is therefore in making, and Daniel Bhai and Asha Didi are most ardent architects of this project. We are fortunate to have both of them here. While Asha Devi completed her doctoral research under Dayaji, Daniel shares a decades-long association with Dayaji. Dayaji's place and influence in contemporary Indian philosophy remain to be assessed with greater degree of neutrality and rigor. This requires a revisiting of Dayaji's writing and his lifelong endeavor to have a dialogue or samvad with the tradition and with the traditions. Our present webinar is a small attempt to reinitiate our samvad with Dayaji. This project in the future webinar of Study Circle, we also seek to revisit Professor P2 Raju, Professor Ramu Gandhi, Professor GC Pandey, Professor Vishambar Pai, Professor R.S. and Shailaja in order to understand the common structure of Jaipur philosopher. I welcome you all once again. Thank you.
Now I would like to request Professor Daniel Ravi to deliberate upon the philosophy of Daya Krishna. The title of his lecture is Daya Krishna, a very short introduction. We also have Dr. Arun Mishra, eminent scholar of Indian logic, Professor Shivani Sharma, Chairperson, Department of Philosophy, Punjab University, Professor Lakshmikant Padi, Head, Department of Philosophy, North Bengal University, Darjeeling, Professor Sushil Dubey, Nalanda University, Bihar, and Professor Pradeep Gupta, sir. And Professor Ambika Dutt Sharma have also joined us. We welcome you, sir. I would like to request Professor Daniel Rave to please
Okay, can you hear me properly? Arvinji, can you hear me? Asha ji, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
Yes, sir.
Working. Okay. So thank you for the invitation. And as always, it's a great pleasure to be with you. One of the only positive things that came out of this COVID is the fact that we can communicate across the globe with great ease and without traveling. So it's a great pleasure to see you all and to speak to you. How much time do I have, Arvinji? What is the length of my talk?
At least 50 minutes.
50 minutes, okay. Okay, so yeah, and I also want to welcome, of course, Professor Sina and Gokle Sahab and KL Sharma.
My namaskar to you, sir.
It is a great pleasure to see all of you here. So I want to start with a short imaginary dialogue written by the author, the novelist Vikram Chandra. Maybe you heard of Vikram Chandra. Maybe you read Vikram Chandra. So I want to start with a few sentences from his novel Red Earth and Pouring Rain, which was published in 2001, an imaginary dialogue between Sikandar, Alexander of Macedonia, Alexander the Great, and an Indian sadhu. You know that the historical anecdote says that Alexander met a naked Indian man on his journey to India. So Vikram Chandra tries to imagine what the dialogue between the emperor and the sadhu would be like. And as I'm reading to you a few lines from this dialogue, please remember that I'm talking about Professor Daya Krishna, about Dayaji. So I will try to suggest that there is something from Dayaji in the sadhu, in this imaginary dialogue. So the dialogue, in fact, is between not between the emperor and the sadhu, but between the translator of the emperor and the sadhu. And the translator starts by saying, he, meaning Sikandar, wants to know why you are naked. And the sadhu answers, and Dayaji answers, ask him why he's wearing clothes. So you realize that the dialogue starts with a question, But instead of an answer, the sadhu here answers with a question of his own. The translator moves on. He says he's asking the questions here. And the sadhu's answer, and Dayaji answers, questions give birth only to other questions. This is interesting. If questions give birth only to other questions, where do answers come from? But I'm leaving this question open at the moment. The translator says, he says, people that get funny with him get executed. Sadhu, why? Translator, because he's the king of kings, and he wants you to stop asking questions. Sadhu, king of kings? Translator, he came all the way from a place called Greece, killing other kings, so he's the king of kings. See? Initial class in political science, he killed others, so now he's the king of kings. Sadhu, full of fools, master clown of clowns, maha-idiot of idiots. This is a beautiful expression, maha-idiot. And it plays, of course, with the word Maharaja and also with the phrase Alexander the Great, maha-idiot. Yes. Translator, you want me to tell him that? Sadhu, I said it, didn't I? Translator, you are crazier than he is. He says he'll kill you right here, right now. Sadhu, I have to die someday. Translator, listen, don't do this. He's demented. He doesn't realize who you are. He thinks naked people are poor savages. He'll really kill you. Sadhu, I'll really have to die someday. Translator, he wants to know why you aren't scared of dying. Sadhu, that would be silly. Translator, he says that's not a satisfactory answer. Sadhu, what sort of answer would he like? Translator, he says you should tell him exactly what mystic path you followed to reach this sublime state of indifference. And he wishes you would stop asking questions. Really, this is incredible. I think you've got him hooked. Sadhu, mystic path? Translator, mystic path, literal translation. So why am I starting with this short dialogue? Because of several reasons. The first reason is, of course, the questions. As many of you would know, many of you who knew Dayaji very well, Dayaji was a master of raising a question. I think that usually we don't know how to ask questions. We are taught that answers are more important than questions. But for Dayaji tried to change the balance between questions and answers. For him, the questions are eternal. The answers are only tentative. So I started with this dialogue because of the questions. I started with this dialogue because of the courage, the courage before power, the courage to stand up and speak freely, the freedom to think, the freedom to speak, the freedom to express yourself. I started with this short dialogue because of the relationship between so-called East and West, or if you wish, the relationship between India and the West. And philosophy being part of this power game, is the West really willing to listen to a non-Western voice? I think that this question bothered Daya for a long time. How can we, if at all we can, create a dialogue between equals, between India and the former colonizer, between India and the West? And the last reason that I started with this dialogue is because of the last questions. The emperor wants to know why the sadhu is not afraid to die, and the sadhu tells him that it would be silly to be afraid. And the emperor wants to know what mystic path the sadhu took to reach this what Vikram Chandra calls sublime state of of fearlessness. And I think that one of the first statements or the first points that Daya raised was that Indian philosophy is not subordinated to the concept and ideal of moksha. Indian philosophy is not moksha. Indian philosophy is not subordinated to any spiritual or religious quest. For Daya, this narrative, the narrative that equals Indian philosophy and moksha, was a colonialist narrative internalized in India. A colonial narrative that on the one hand expresses the Western fascination about the so-called Indian exoticism, and on the other hand intended to keep the Western monopoly over rationality. And I'm reading you a quote from Daya Krishna's lectures in Shimla, in the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, 2005. He gave three lectures under the title Indian philosophy. He gave 3 lectures under the title Civilizations, Nostalgia, and Utopia. And Dayaji is asking his listeners in Shimla, 2005, has not India had a long tradition of science, astronomy, medicine, linguistics, everything? And he answers sarcastically, no, we have built temples. But temples, he continues, cannot be built without knowledge of engineering, knowledge of materials, knowledge of metals, knowledge of everything. However, for some reason, we do not regard this knowledge as important. Have we not contributed tremendously in the field of mathematics? It is amazing that this Indian civilization does not think of itself in terms of knowledge of any kind. Imagine, and some of you knew Dayaji very well, so they remember this word that he used to use so often. Imagine, Ashaji. We are not interested in the millennia-long thinking which took place in this country on understanding language through language. I'm sorry to say that we are simply uninterested. India's picture, as it has been built, is a picture of huge suppression. We are spiritual people, seekers of moksha and nirvana. We are not interested in this world. This world is unreal to us. It is Maya or Lila, and it does not really matter. India is a land where reason and argumentation were so central to the civilization, and yet we identify the West with reason. We think that the West is rational, that the West is reason-centric, whereas we are not. This passionate plea I wrote here was made, as I told you, in 2005, but the picture of, quote, we have built temples, the West is rational, unquote, is still intact. So now I want to share with you or to tell you something that many of you would know. I want to say that Dayaji dedicated his academic life, his thinking life, to 4 central projects. The first project, which was initiated immediately after his PhD dissertation and his first book, The Nature of Philosophy, that Asha might be saying something about. The first project was socializing for India as a new nation state. And this Dayaji was doing in 2 ways, but in 2 methods. One was bending Western theory for India. Bending, I'm using the term bending, I'm borrowing the word bending from Raghuram Raju. Raghuram Raju is using the word bending because bending is a very gentle thing. If you bend too much, something would break. But if you bend, in the right way, so you can that which you are bending can be useful, can be fruitful. So one way was bending a Western theory about society and polity for India, and the other way was digging deep into classical Indian sources, for example, Kautilya's Arthashastra. So the first project is socializing for the newly created India. The second project was rereading of old classical Indian texts. Rereading of old texts from the Veda and the Upanishads through the Sutras to Shankara and the Bhagavata Purana. Take these three titles as an illustration. Daya Krishna's book, the Nyaya Sutras, a new commentary on an old text from 2004. Or another title, the undeciphered text. Listen to this beautiful title, to this Dayaji-like title. The undeciphered text, anomalies, problems, and paradoxes in the Yoga Sutra from 2006. So much has been written on the Yoga Sutra traditionally and contemporarily, and yet Daya Krishna refers to the text as the undeciphered text. This undecipherability is what makes the text interesting for Daya Krishna. Or take another title, another beautiful title. There are so many titles of his rereadings. So another title would be, Did the Gopis Really Love Krishna? Some reflections on bhakti as a purushartha in the Indian tradition. Did the gopis really love Krishna? How can someone ask such a question? I mean, we know that the gopis are those who love Krishna. But Dayaji in this paper tries to connect bhakti and rasa. And the idea is that at some stage, the gopis, only Dayaji is bold enough to read the Bhagavata Purana and come to the conclusion that at some stage, Krishna becomes an obstacle for the gopis' love. The gopis' love, which according to Daya Krishna becomes objectless love, pure rasa. So these are the titles that I'm giving you for Dayaji's second project, the rereading of classical Indian texts. Always he managed to ask the unasked question. You know, I mean, many of you would know that he was using this very mota chashma, very thick glasses. And you know, as a student, as Dayaji's PhD student, I was always wondering where this new, fresh reading is coming from. And when he didn't notice, I would take his chashma and put it on my eyes. I was much younger. I was not using a chashma myself. I wanted to obtain the jadoo of Dayaji's chashma. Unfortunately, it was symbolically working, but not otherwise, to use his chashma. The third project is the Samvad project, the meetings between Pandits and professors. I will speak at length about the Samvad project in a minute. The fourth project was Daya Krishna's political writing in journals such as Quest, that was closed during the emergency, and later in the new Quest, and also in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly. Daya Krishna's political writings are not unconnected to his attempt at decolonizing knowledge. Apropos Swarajin ideas, K.C. Bhattacharya's famous manifesto from the end of the 1920s. I think that Daya Krishna's political writings cannot be disconnected from the other writings in his corpus. I don't know how acquainted some of you are with K.C. Bhattacharya's writings, but you know that when the collected writings of K.C. Bhattacharya was published for the first time in 1956 by his eldest son, Gopinath Bhattacharya, Swarajin ideas was not included in the collected works of K.C. Bhattacharya. The idea was, let's separate politics from philosophy. And I think that this attempt goes against K.C. Bhattacharya and against Daya Krishna's vision. Politics of freedom, politics which means freedom at the level of thinking, Swarajin ideas, was a central trajectory in K.C. Bhattacharya and Daya Krishna. So before I'm saying something about the Samvad project, which would be the center of my talk, I want to mention to you a website. Actually, my talk here is just a gate, just a window to a website called Daya Krishna, the Open Library. Daya Krishna, the Open Library. If you type in Google Daya Krishna, probably the first thing that you'll find is a Wikipedia entry, and the second thing would be Daya Krishna, the Open Library. With the generosity of his family, all of Daya Krishna's, almost, I think that more than 90% of Daya Krishna's writings, including books and articles, are there, open for download, for reading in the open library. The address is Daya Krishna, is in one word, dayakrishna.org. And also on the same website, you can listen to Daya Krishna's last public lectures at Shimla 2005 that I was quoting from. So if you want to listen to Daya Krishna's own voice, not only to other voices talking about Dayaji, you are most welcome to search, to look, to get into the Open Library. The Open Library was created by two of my colleagues, Elis Kokero from the University of Vienna, and Dor Miller, my colleague from Tel Aviv. So the Samvad project. The Samvad project was initiated in the 1980s by Daya Krishna with colleagues such as MP Rege, R.C. Dwivedi, and Mukund Lat. The idea behind the project, Daya Krishna explains in the preface of his book, Discussion and Debate in Indian Philosophy, 2004, was to bring together, quote, active practitioners of the two philosophical traditions, the Indian and the Western, in a dialogical situation where each was forced to existentially face the living tradition of a different way of philosophizing, unquote. And when I'm talking about two groups, Western and Indian, I mean contemporary Indian philosophers, some educated traditionally in Sanskrit and others educated in the Western type, the English type universities. Every phrase I'm writing here in the quote is interesting. Active practitioners, dialogic situation, forced to existentially face living tradition, ways of philosophizing. This project, or experiment, as Daya Krishna often referred to it, established a dialogue between pundits and professors, i.e. professors thinking and writing in Sanskrit and their brothers and sisters trained in the parallel tradition of European or Western philosophy. On a variety of philosophical topics, these meetings discussed a variety of philosophical topics, from issues in philosophy of language to philosophical exploration of the emotions. In a letter dated February 2006, Daya Krishna speaks of the meeting of these two intellectual traditions as, quote, something like the Sangam at Prayagraj, the famous confluence of the Ganga and the Yamuna near Allahabad. This meeting of these two rivers or goddesses reveals a third goddess, river, namely Saraswati. Saraswati Sri Aurobindo, not just a yogi, guru, and poet, but an argumentative philosopher and inspiration to Dayaji in his initial years, writes in The Secret of the Veda, in his book, The Secret of the Veda, he says, Saraswati means she of the stream. The flowing movement Saraswati possesses and is the flood of the truth. Truth comes to us as a light, a voice, compelling a change of thought, imposing a new discernment of ourselves and all around us. Unquote. Except for the capital T truth, which is foreign to Daya Krishna's thinking, Aurobindo's poetic account explains the Samvad project as envisioned by Dayaji. It was a matter of discovering a flowing movement in Indian philosophy, an attempt toward a change of thought and a new discernment. Moreover, it was a new instance of comparative philosophy, a new type of East-West exchange. My next paragraph, I refer to my next paragraph as the political cat, taking the cat out of the bag, the political cat. In developments in Indian philosophy since the coming of the British, chapter 11 of Daya Krishna's book, Developments in Indian Philosophy from the 18th century onwards, from 2002, and in Development in Classical Indian Philosophy after the British intrusion and the creation of apartheid in the intellectual world of modern India, chapter 18 of Daya Krishna's alternative textbook, Indian Philosophy, A New Approach, from 1997, Daya Krishna explains the background to the apartness or the gap between the Pandits and the professors that the Samvad project aimed to bridge. Under the British Raj, Dayaji writes, the whole world of classical knowledge and those who pursued and practiced it became gradually invisible to those who came out of the new institutions modeled on the British pattern. The two worlds developed in almost complete ignorance of each other and had hardly any awareness of the other or interaction. The apartheid, this is Dayaji's word, the apartheid in Daya Krishna's title refers to the gradual invisibility of the Pandits and the Pandit way of philosophizing and the creation of two parallel intellectual worlds. Jonardon Ganeri's monograph, The Lost Age of Reason, Philosophy in Early Modern India, 1450 to 1700, from 2011, covers the historical period just before Daya Krishna's 18th century onwards. In his introduction, Ganeri prefers the terms bifurcation over Daya Krishna's harsh apartheid. Ganeri blames, quote, the disruption caused by the British imposition of new fiscal arrangements and educational politics for the discontinuity of the Age of Reason that his book portrays. Work in New Reason, Ganeri writes, and Navi Anyaya, or New Reason, is the heart of this Age of Reason, continued into the 19th and 20th centuries in an educational setup now sharply bifurcated between low-prestige traditional networks and well-funded colonial colleges and universities. Ganeri closes his introduction suggesting, speculating, regretting that, quote, what was lost, this lost age of reason, is what might have been had the bifurcation not taken place, unquote. But Daya Krishna is hardly nostalgic. He does not regret the what might have been, and is eager to rectify the situation. What? I'm saying Dayaji is not nostalgic and he's eager to rectify the situation now and here through the Samvad project. But you surely want me to say something on the content of the Samvad project, the philosophical content. Take this example. I'm giving you now I'm going through one Samvad, one dialogue with the Pandits. In Daya Krishna's paper, Socio-Political Thought in Classical India, 1997, in fact, a recap of his book, The Problematic and Conceptual Structure of Classical Indian Thought About Man, Society, and Polity, from 1996. And I'm reading to you all these titles basically as a temptation to encourage you, especially the students, to go and read the Dayaji firsthand. So in this paper, the Socio-Political Thought, which is a recap of a longer book on the subject, Dayaji shares an issue that bothered him over time, and which is discussed in several of his essays. The political theorist, he writes, was also interested in theoretically countering the radically individualistic implication of the theory of karma, which almost led to moral monadism. But what is moral monadism? And how and why would the theory of karma lead to moral monadism? Daya Krishna explains in his early Shimla lectures, delivered in 1967 and first published in 1969. These lectures are also on the same website, dayakrishna.org. So Dayaji explains, according to the theory of karma, as we all know, one's present position in the world is the causal result of one's actions in the past. In the same way, one's present actions will determine one's future position. It is implied, and this is Daya Krishna's concern, that the karma theory leaves no place for the other. For you. The other at best is instrumental to enable me to bring to fruition the karmic baggage that I carry along, and hopefully to acquire, owing to my attitude towards him or her, punya, merit, good karma, that will have positive future consequences. One can hardly affect the other. One's actions determine one's own karma and one's future born of this karma. Morally speaking, then, each to his own. Therefore, Daya Krishna speaks of monadic morality or moral monadism. In Socio-Political, this is the title of the paper, he works with the notion of responsibility. Strangely, he writes, neither the political nor social theorists of classical India moved forward to develop a full-fledged theory of karma, of action, in which collective responsibility could become the center of theoretical concern in reflection of human action. It is only the king who was supposed to share in the merit and demerit of his subjects. But as far as his subjects were concerned, there was no sharing in the fruits of action. Daya Krishna's critique of, quote, the prison house of I-centricity, and the illusion of, I quote again, in the beginning there was the self. Atmai Vedam Agra Asit, the phrase which opens two of the creation myths in chapter 1 of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, his critique of the prison house of I-centricity and of in the beginning there was the self, now takes a social turn. Social, since action is at the heart of the social realm. Daya Krishna does not hesitate to reveal a flaw in one of the fundamental assets of the Indian culture, the theory of karma. But this is not all. How does this moral monadism, Daya Krishna wonders, fit with the entire procedure of the Vedic yagya, the Vedic sacrifice? In the yagya, the yajamana, the patron of the ritual, hires the services of a ritvika, a priest, to perform the ritual for him. The labor, the craft, the doing are all the priest's. Hence, according to the theory of karma, the fruits should be his. But surprisingly, it is not the yajamana. Surprisingly, it is the yajamana who enjoys, or is supposed to enjoy, the fruits of this action. The whole ritual is formed to enable him to reap the fruits. In light of this alleged contradiction between karma and yagya, Daya Krishna appealed to an ensemble of pandits of the Mimamsaka tradition and asked them if Jaimini, author of the Mimamsa Sutra, quote, accepts the principle that whoever does the karma, its phala, its fruit, goes to him only, or does Jaimini have a different theory of karma? Why Jaimini of the Mimamsa Sutra? Since the Mimamsakas are interested in the ritual, or as Johannes Boonkost more accurately puts it, strictly speaking, and seen from their own theoretical perspective, the Mimamsakas were not interested in the ritual. They studied the eternal Veda using refined tools of interpretation, and it turned out that the Veda told them to perform rituals. The ritual activities were not the result of their interest in ritual, but the outcome of their study of the infallible Veda. Had their interpretational efforts convinced them that the Veda told them to play tennis, they would have been playing tennis, whether they liked it or not. And I'm responding, I'm saying, since they do not play tennis, the Mimamsakas, but to know the ins and the outs of the Vedic ritual, Daya Krishna addresses his query about the alleged contradiction between karma and yagya to the Mimamsakas, the present-day descendants of Jaimini. This query was the starting point of another round of Samvad, under the title, Does Mimamsa treat the theory of karma as a Purva Paksha, as a counterposition, which appeared on the pages of the ICPR and later in Daya Krishna's book, Discussion and Debate in Indian Philosophy. Daya Krishna's query was translated into Sanskrit for the Pandits, and the response translated back into English. Daya Krishna insisted that the original Sanskrit is published together with its translation to demonstrate that, quote, Sanskrit still is a living all-Indian language of intellectual discourse, as Daya Krishna puts it in his Shimla Lectures 2005. In search of a remedy for the monadic implications of the theory of karma, Daya Krishna appeals to the Vedic yagya. The Vedic ritual is traditionally seen as the paradigmatic human action, resonating in every other action. Swarga kamo yajeta, whoever wishes to reach heaven should sacrifice, is the basic formula of human action. Action is projected as the connecting thread between desire and fruit, or between desire and the achievement of the object or objective of desire. As always, Daya Krishna sees what others do not, namely the contradiction between karma and yagya, the two central theoretical frames of action in classical India. According to the former, one's actions and no one else's have consequences on oneself and no one else. In the latter, the actions of one person have consequences on another. But the Pandits in this round of Samvad do not seem to grasp the broader picture at the horizon of Daya Krishna's query. Instead, they provide him with a samadhana, a solution to his query based on classical texts. Daya Krishna asks them whether Jaimini accepts the karma theory, which appears to contradict the foundation of the yagya. No contradiction is their unanimous answer and solution, as the following lines will show. But Daya Krishna, everyone acquainted with his corpus would know, is hardly interested in solutions. Of course, he is interested to be enlightened about the position of the Mimamsa Sutra and its commentarial body, but his attempt is more far-reaching. He aspires to think with and from these source texts and to formulate a new theory of action based on reciprocity between self and other and self. No less than 8 Pandits responded to Daya Krishna's query. The first of them, maybe here I'll jump a few passages. Basically, I'm quoting the Pandits, and all of them are claiming that the Ajamana is actually the doer, and the priests are just helping him to perform the yagya. Maybe I'll read to you just one of the Pandits. I'm reading to you from Pandit Surya Prakash Shastri. He says, the Bhashya, Shabara's commentary on the Mimamsa Sutra, clearly says that since the Ajamana does the Utsarga, the act of offering the sacrifice to the deity, by that deed, he does the whole thing. And then there are 2 other Pandits. Pandit Varada Acharya and Pandit Lakshmi Narayan Murti. And they say that the Ajamana is paying dakshina to the priests, but he's the sole doer. I'm looking for I'm looking for a certain quote that I wanted to read to you. Okay, here it is. Pandit N.S. Ramanuja Tatacharya and Sampath Narayan tell Daya Krishna. They say the Ritvikas are like soldiers. The Ritvikas and the Ajamana are like soldiers and their king. They fight for him, but the victory belongs to the king. The king enjoys the kingdom, not the warrior. This is what they suggest. For them, the hierarchy is clear. But why can there be no sharing of victory and kingdom? It is a fact of life. It is a fact of life that people often work together, collaborate, cooperate, and enjoy the fruits of their action together. Rajendra Swarup Bhatnagar, another illustrious thinker from the University of Rajasthan, Department of Philosophy, R.S. Bhatnagar goes as far as suggesting that every human action is a collaboration carried out in a setting which enables, or at least does not prevent its performance. Hence, the idea of my action is a misnomer. It is also a fact of life that people share the pain and pleasure of others around them, the fruits of their karma, if you wish. But why this shareability does not find adequate expression and is not duly discussed at the theoretical level, either in karma or yagya? In his answer to Daya Krishna's query, Sampath Narayan further maintains that, quote, here too, namely with reference to the Vedic ritual, the Vedic injunction is the deciding factor and not logic. This marks the difference between insider and outsider. For Daya Krishna, the Vedic injunction is not the final word, and his insistence on shareability, which he was hoping to find in a more pronounced fashion in the Mimamsaka reading of the Vedic ritual as against the moral monadism that he diagnosed in the theory of karma, is a central leitmotif of his social thinking, shareability. It goes back to Daya Krishna's earliest samvad, years before the dialogue with the Pandits has been conceived, with Asian economists. And Daya Krishna's ardent query about the individual kisan, the particular farmer, within the broader picture of concepts such as welfare and development. This samvad, this early samvad, this economic samvad occurs on the pages of Daya Krishna's early work, Planning, Power, and Welfare, from 1959. It is a dialogue between Daya Krishna, then at the Department of Philosophy, Sagar University, and economists from the University of Saigon, Vietnam, and the University of Dhaka, now Bangladesh. It is, or it was, an intra-Asian dialogue between scholars from the non-West attempting to decolonize the concept of welfare. Daya Krishna's later motto, quote, when people gather together, something new emerges, captures the incentive behind this dialogue. But a dialogue is not an easy task, especially when the participants belong not just to different countries and cultures, but even disciplines. Daya Krishna, the publisher of this early samvad, notes, is not a professional economist. That may perhaps be the reason why he is able to approach the subject from a fresh angle. But what appealed to the publisher as fresh was not necessarily seen as such by the economists, or later by the Pandits. Many years later, Daya Krishna looked back at his work in different areas of philosophy and remarked, again I'm quoting, the questions that we ask them, specialists of different disciplines, here the economists, in the first samvad, the economists, appeared both new and inconvenient. The advantage of the outsider, he further explains, and for him, the philosopher is always necessarily an outsider, is that his inconvenient questions can work in the direction of quote unquote disrupting old frames, hence opening new horizons for thinking. In his Samvad with the economists, Daya Krishna inquires about the human person, the individual. He wants to know how the particular villager or urbanite, man and woman, participates or fits in or enjoys the fruits of the master game called economic development. He is further interested and works towards the clarification of the connection between welfare and concepts such as power and freedom. Daya Krishna insists on shareability of fruits from the Vedic ritual to post-colonial economy, but then, as Romila Thapar shows, I jumped over a quote from Romila Thapar, perhaps the two, economy and ritual, are not as far apart as they may seem. Last paragraph about karma, and then let's see if I have little more time for something more. Why Krishna, Yuvraj Krishna, a prolific theorist of the karma theory that many of you must know, joins here as elsewhere Daya Krishna's discussion. In his paper Collective Karmas from 1989, he suggests that collective karmas can be defined in terms of A, the authors or person who perform the karmas, the action, and B, the retribution of karmas, when it affects simultaneously a large number of persons. As in mass tragedies, he writes, both natural and man-made. Krishna seeks to formulate the concept of collective karma, drawing on two main sources. First, on this doctrine of Anatmavada, which sees interconnectivity, or if you wish, intersubjectivity, at the very level of selfhood. Since there is no separate self, but instead a network of relations, karma cannot be perceived as belonging to any separate self. In other words, Krishna writes, there is a universal, undifferentiated corpus of karma, as against corpora in severality. And second, Krishna draws on the writings of contemporary thinkers, such as Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, and Sri Aurobindo, who, like Daya Krishna, see the urgent need for shareability. Aurobindo, for instance, refers in The Problem of Rebirth to karma of the family, of the nation, of humankind as a whole, but at the same time insists that, quote, what matters supremely is what I make of my heredity, and not what my heredity makes of me. This is Aurobindo as quoted by Krishna. The Hindus, Krishna agrees with Daya Krishna, firmly believed in the doctrine of personal responsibility of a man for his moral acts. And moreover, the concept of collective karma, which he endeavors to develop, is foreign. This is Krishna, is foreign to the Indian religious traditions, and in fact, a negation of the classical doctrine of karma. Okay, so now the question is, how much time is left for me? I want to read to you at least one more quote from Dayaji. Arvind G. Surendra, how much time do I still have?
Sir, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, 5 minutes is a good time. So I was planning to go with you through another samvad on the Vedantic notion of adhyasa, in Shankara's Brahma Sutra Bhashya, but I don't have the time to do it. And instead, I will close with a quote from a letter written by Dayaji in 2006 to his friend, novelist, poet, thinker, Ramesh Chandra Shah. And I'm thankful, of course, to Shah Sahab for allowing me, for giving me the permission to quote from this letter. And this is what Daya Krishna writes to Shah Sahab in 2003, in 2006. And please listen to Dayaji apropos the pandemic, apropos the COVID that none of us could even imagine in 2006. This is what Dayaji writes. My dear Shah, I hope your worry about my illness is over. Dayaji was severely sick in August 2006, and he passed away from his sickness sometime after. So you write to Shah Sahab, I hope that your worry about my illness is over. Though illness seems to be a natural condition of life at all its stages and ages. And by the way, if you ever read Dayaji, and some of you have read Dayaji is using quote marks on many words when he's writing. In this letter, he says, I hope that you worry about my illness, that your worry about my illness is over, though illness seems to be a natural, quote unquote, natural condition of life in all its stages and ages. I think that Dayaji's quote marks are marking a word. Whenever he wants you to think about that specific word, about that specific context, about that specific concept, within context and out of context, out of its conventional context, he is marking the word with quote marks. So he says, I hope that your worry about my illness is over, even though sickness is quote unquote a natural condition of life. The stranger problem is that there are not only diseases of life, but what may be called the body, but also of the mind and reason and intellect, and even of the spirit. Illnesses of the mind, reason, intellect, and even the spirit. Mental illnesses are fairly well known, but not so the diseases which reason itself is prone to. As for spiritual illnesses, one hardly hears about them. But what about imagination? Does it play an important role in diseases at all these levels? And if so, what is the quote-unquote cure for those diseases, which are rooted in imagination and at another level in consciousness itself? If consciousness is a quote-unquote disease that has affected life, then could not quote-unquote life be considered a disease that has affected matter? Matter itself does not seem to have any diseases, though there is such a thing as rusting or radioactive decay, which in any case have not been seen as such, as diseases. At one time, the story of the black hole seemed to suggest something analogous to what may be called disease at the heart of matter. But as Stephen Hawking has gone back on his earlier theory, as recently reported in the newspapers, we can hardly see them as such. You are a writer, Dayaji writes to Shah Sahab. Why not write on this? Is literature a disease of language, just as, according to Wittgenstein, philosophy is a disease which language suffers from when it takes a holiday from its daily use? Imagine writing to you like this, but it is the person to whom the letter is written that provokes a thought current appropriate to him or her. And the last thing that I want to tell you, I mean, it is simply remarkable that when Shah Sahab is writing to Dayaji about Dayaji's illness, Dayaji is not interested at all in his own illness. He's interested in illness as such, in illness as a concept. He takes his own sickness as an excuse, as an occasion to think what sickness is all about. This is the first thing that I want to say in response to this letter. The second thing is the last lines. You are a writer. Why don't you write on this? And I think that, and many of you I'm sure share this feeling, that Dayaji's role as one of the most important thinkers in India in the second half of the 20th century was to encourage others to write, to encourage others to think without fear. Thank you.
Thank you for giving nice talk. Thank you.
Sureshji, you are muted.
Thank you, Professor Daniel Rave, for the words of wisdom and dismantling the notions which have come to define Indian philosophy. Now we are open for questions or comments. So anybody would like to ask a question? Comment?
Great thinkers in the audience. I'm waiting to hear what Ashaji thinks, what Professor Sina thinks, what KL Saab thinks.
Yes, Professor K.L. Sharma, please make a comment on what Professor Daniel has said.
Daniel, sir, I would like to ask a question to you. If I'm allowed, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Yes,
Sir,
please.
sir, Daya Krishna, sir, comment on the notion that those who are writing in English are not basically aware about the notion of Indian philosophy. He commented on Radha Krishnan and so on. So how would you comment on that thing? Because in the modern time, we are not able to read and write in Sanskrit. So are we gonna be learn Indian philosophy or not? Or is there any notion or future of Indian philosophy in English or not? So what would you say on this thing?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting question. I mean, the question was, two American scholars, two friends of mine, Professor Jay Garfield and Professor Nalini Bhushan, took an interview with Daya Krishna in 2006. A very interesting interview. They quote from this interview in two books that they published. One book is a reader of Indian philosophy in English under the British Raj, and the other book that came out in 2017 is called Mind. What's the title? Mind Without Fear, I think. It's basically an analysis of the texts which are included in the first book in the reader. And in this interview, they tell Dayaji that they plan to work, to look into, to have a research of Indian philosophy in English under the British colonialism. And Daya Krishna tells them, Indian philosophy cannot be written in English. It has to be written in, I don't know exactly whether in Sanskrit or any other Indian language. So the answer is clear. Daya Krishna was posing a Purva Paksha. Daya Krishna was trying basically to encourage them to do the research, but encouraging them via negativa. They were telling him, we want to study Indian philosophy in English. He was asking them, is there really anything like Indian philosophy in English? And I think that this I don't think that Dayaji undermines Indian philosophy in English. If you read at least the two books that I mentioned to you, Developments in Indian Philosophy from the 18th century onwards, and the textbook, Dayaji's alternative textbook, Indian Philosophy and New Approach, both books you can find on the website, on Daya Krishna, the Open Library. You will see that Daya Krishna, of course, has a lot of respect and interest in Indian philosophy written in English. Now the question is, what is Indian about Indian philosophy? And this is a very important question. I don't know if you're thinking or writing in this direction. What makes Indian philosophy Indian philosophy? Do I need to write on the Upanishads or the Veda to do Indian philosophy? When Mukund Lat, for example, a classicist, a Sanskritist and a classicist, when he writes on the rasa theory, do we consider it as Indian philosophy? But when he writes about Aristotle, this is not Indian philosophy. So the question is, what is Indian about Indian philosophy? Some would argue moksha. I started by rejecting this claim, by rejecting spirituality as the feature that distinguishes Indian philosophy. I'm not sure that Professor Sina would agree with me. I actually read what Professor Sina wrote on the day that he started to edit the ICPR. And Professor Sina was saying something about spirituality at the horizon of Indian philosophy. But if it is not moksha, if according to Daya Krishna there are several centers in Indian philosophy, according to Dayaji dialogue perhaps, samvad is a main feature of Indian philosophy. According to Dayaji, social and political philosophy are as important, are as central in Indian philosophy as moksha. If philosophy of language is as central, is another center. So what is Indian about Indian philosophy? Someone like Mukund Lart that I just mentioned would say language. And this is the reason that Mukundji, it's important that we work, that we remember with Mukund's work. It is important that we remember the great philosophers of the last generation in Jaipur. Mukundji would say language, and therefore Mukundji wrote mostly, and from a certain phase of his work, mostly or only in Hindi. So I think that apropos the question, can Indian philosophy be written in English? I think that Dayaji's provocative statement, Indian philosophy cannot be written in English, is an invitation, is yet another invitation to think over the question, what is Indian about Indian philosophy? And I want to say one last thing to the person who asked me. Actually, this question was asked to me. Ken, I was asked this question by many via email, etc. And I think that it's a pity that we live in an era of one-liners. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Did he say anything else? Wittgenstein said that which cannot be spoken about, ... This is Wittgenstein, and now Dayaji is at the risk of being remembered by that provocative sentence, which is actually an invitation for thinking. It's not a statement representing his own view. It's an invitation for thinking. The sentence Indian philosophy can or cannot be done in such and such a language. And the reason that the Dayaji might be remembered for this sentence is because of the fact that Jane Nalini's work is so accessible nowadays, and Dayaji's work is less accessible. So my last sentence in reply to this question is, please go into Daya Krishna, the Open Library, and don't be satisfied with the one-liner.
Thank you, Professor Daniel. I would request Professor R.C. Sinha to comment on Professor Daniel's talk.
I must offer my namaskar, pranam to each and everyone.
Welcome, sir.
I had been listening very patiently. I may commit mistakes in uttering names, but some of the names I do remember. Arvind Vikram Singh, Asha Mukherjee, Professor Sharma, Professor Ranjan Ghosh, Ranjit Ghosh. So they are just, I can see on this screen. And certainly, I must congratulate. It is a very astonishing talk. Certainly, full. He had experienced and he had read also. He was in association, as I know, that he had been in association with Professor Daya Krishna, and by reading books, you can learn some concepts, some philosophy. But by being in association with a person, you can learn many things which books cannot teach. So I must narrate how I came to know about Professor Daya Krishna. Because I was a student of VHU. And one day, at that time, I was living with Professor N.K. Devraj because I could not get the hostel. And so he offered me that you can live with. So he had a great house, very grand house. So I was living in one of the rooms. One day he came from outside and he gave me 3 articles written by Professor Daya Krishna. At that time, it was published in, he was in the, published in the East and West in philosophy. So 3 articles, so long back in 1967. When Professor Daya Krishna came from East and West, center, and he handed over to Professor N.K. Devraj. So the first time I heard his name, and then certainly I had a chance to listen him. And once I had a chance to talk to him very closely in Delhi. As a matter of fact, I can say that I am very much impressed by his critical, creative, original thought. I do not claim that I have read him much. And I thank to Professor Asa Mukherjee that sometimes she rather impels me to read the literature of Professor Daya Krishna and write also. But I cannot claim that I have read him thoroughly. He has written a lot of books. I remember his PhD work on the nature of philosophy. He got his PhD from Delhi University under Professor N.K. Banerjee, perhaps. I don't remember the name. Professor Banerjee, Nikunj Bihari Banerjee. I was wondering sometimes that why Professor Daya Krishna was not appointed in Delhi. That was, and why he went to Sagar University. So I knew him. I learned many stories about him, philosophical and non-philosophical too, because my wife belonged to Sagar. And my father-in-law and Professor Daya Krishna was living in Sagar University side by side. Professor Daya Krishna, Professor Shama Charan Dubey, and Professor Daya Krishna and Professor S.C. Dubey. They were very close friends. So these are the personal things which I came to know and I learned from my friends. Regarding the talk given by Professor Daniel, I can just concentrate on 2 points. One is about philosophizing and the other is about the relationship between man and society. He has quoted from that book, Social Philosophy, Past and Present, few lectures given in IIS, Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and the book was published in 1969. And one thing also I say that the study circle, when Professor Arvind Vikram Singh approached me that ICPR should grant a study circle to the Jaipur. So naturally, there was no option for me except to say yes. So immediately I said, because Professor Daya Krishna has served a lot to philosophy and to the council. Rather, this council, Indian Council of Philosophical Research, in one way or the other, I cannot say it is the brainchild of Professor Daya Krishna only, but Professor Daya Krishna played a major role. Professor Daya Krishna, D.P. Chattopadhyay, these two names are, and K. Sachidanand Murthy, they were instrumental in establishing this Indian Council of Philosophical Research. And I thank Professor Daniel for giving a very erudite and very philosophical treatment, though the theme was not spelled out by the organizers. It was simply philosophy of Daya Krishna, and that is a very wide topic. There are certain some themes should have been selected, and I don't know why they put. So naturally, this is the inaugural session or the inaugural day. So the theme is okay, but for Daya Krishna, we need some intensive research. In North India, his name is known, but nobody cares to read about Professor Daya Krishna. That is the tragedy of the of Indian this community of philosophers, that they do not concentrate on Indian creative thinkers, and especially when we talk about contemporary thinkers, they think that philosophy ends with Vedanta. And Professor Daya Krishna also has stipulated that this is a wrong thinking, that Indian philosophy, normally we divide Indian philosophy in two categories. One is the heterodox and the other is the orthodox. And philosophizing is rather chained, rather philosophizing ends with Vedanta. And in contemporary India, no philosophizing, serious philosophizing has been done. This is the general impression. And this impression has been created by, not only by the Westerners, but by Indians, because they do not take the literature of contemporary Indian thinkers seriously. So that is the need of the hour. We should go through the literature of Professor Daya Krishna. So I was talking that Professor Daya Krishna holds that Indian philosophy or philosophizing in India has been a continuous process, and it is not closed with the Vedantic thought. He has his Hindi, one book in Hindi, Darshan Shastra, something like that, Bharatiya Darshan. Bharatiya Darshan, that book. So in that book, he has very clearly mentioned that new trends in philosophizing in India have emerged, and we have to strengthen that emergence of the new trends. So the other point, since I should not be very long, the other point which he mentioned, that Indian philosophy is moksha-centric. And certainly Professor Daya Krishna is a rationalist. And one thing which I have got impression, I may be thoroughly wrong, that in Professor Daya Krishna thought, or in his philosophy, there is a tension, always tension. Tension because on the one hand, he likes Western thought, Western way of doing philosophy. But he's deeply concerned with Indian way of philosophizing. So on the one hand, he makes a criticism that Indian philosophy lapses into, ultimately lapses into moksha, or the ultimate goal of Indian philosophy is to attain moksha. So this moksha-centric Indian philosophy actually philosophizing, he considers is a rational endeavor. So if we lapse into moksha, so we cease to do philosophizing properly. That I may be wrong, but that is a one comment on the lecture, the theme. The second thing, and I will speak a few lines about the relationship, because Professor Daya Krishna has written thought over social philosophy also, and his lectures given in Indian Institute of Advanced Study, very remarkable lectures, published also, a very thin book, Social Philosophy, Past and Present. So he wanted continuity of the tradition, and he was very the modernity. So here also we find a sort of tension in his philosophizing, because on the one hand he talks about social centric relationship, or the morality. Morality is always a social centric. On the other hand, he says that I do not find a very good expression. So Atma-centric, he does not find very good English word or something like that. He says that I can use the terminology Atma-centric. So the relationship between man and society and the morality, on the one hand, is social centric, on the other hand is Atma-centric, because we find that actually I think that values do not emerge out of the sky, out of the blue. Values emerge in interpersonal relationship. So values are certainly social centric. but he's he's not a Marxist, and he's not a but he thinks that values do emerge out of the values are not atma-centric, because individual, if I have got some self-realization, so self-realization, we cannot give create a value which is accepted by society. So there is a tension. I say that in Dayakrist philosophy, and that tension is the cause of his creativity. That tension is not negative, but a true philosopher, and he was very fond of Kesi Bhattacharya, and rightly Professor Daniel has streamlined, spelled out that he wanted decolonizing the Indian philosophy. So certainly, and the one that Professor Dayakrishna, philosophizing should not be boxed in boxed by literature. So he says that a person who knows Sanskrit, he knows the literature, and philosophizing is not doing literature or साहित्य. साहित्य सर्जना एक चीज है और दर्शन दूसरी चीज है. हाँ, one can be true to his tradition, and one can, if one knows in the fag end of his life. Earlier he was very critical of the Indian philosophy, as I came to know by reading some of the books, and my teacher, Professor Rajan Prasad, he happened to be his friend, so he narrated some of the stories. So Professor Rajan Prasad was also critical to Indian philosophy, and sometimes he also told that what is there in philosophy, if our ultimate goal is a moksha, so what kind of philosophizing will be there? So, but that is now it is. I do not subscribe to this theory. I feel that in one question he raised, that what is Indian in Indian philosophy, and if somebody in America is doing Indian philosophy, so how we can understand him? Whether we can call him Indian philosopher, or whether we can call him American philosopher. Actually, philosophy knows no boundary, east and the west. Philosophizing knows no boundary. It is a process. But when we when we understand philosophizing as cultural activity, then the question of Indian and the Western and the then only Russian or Chinese, when we and actually philosophizing is a cultural activity. But on some higher level, we think that philosophizing, and in the very beginning of my career, in one of the seminars in BHU, it was a Center of Advanced Study, galaxy of scholars were there, and the title was given by Professor T.R.B. Murthy, East and West in Philosophy, And I very strongly I said that there is nothing like East and West in philosophy. That was the stand in my early philosophical life. But now I redefine the philosophy. It is a cultural activity, and when we we think that philosophizing is certainly a cultural activity. Then certainly we talk in terms of the Indian philosophy and the Eastern philosophy or the Western philosophy, because philosophizing is not simply, even the rationality is not an abstract one.
संख्या तो ठीक ही
Rationality is also influenced by our rationality is also not so objective. It is influenced by our cultural background. So I may be giving some controversial statements, but I must congratulate Professor Daniel, and hopefully I came to listen Professor Asa Mukherjee. So how you have planned, I don't know. So please, please, Arvind.
Sir, sir, the Asha Mukherjee ma'am talk is still due. Sir, the aim for the today's talk was to introduce Dayaji, to give an overview of his thoughts, so we did not limit it to one or two themes.
Okay. So thank you very much. But you should have introduced the ICPR also, because Dayaji has contributed a lot to ICPR, and ICPR has in turn has done a lot for Dayaji also.
Thank you, Professor Aris Sinha, for the valuable comments on philosophy of Professor Daya Krishna. It was a pleasure to hear your words. You enlightened us about the philosophy of Professor Daya Krishna, as well as his contribution to ICPR. Now, I would also like to welcome Professor Dilip Kuhan Mohanta, Calcutta University, ex-Honorable Vice Chancellor, Kalyani University, and Calcutta Sanskrit University. Professor Pradeep Gokhale, eminent scholar of Indian philosophy. Professor HS Gaud, Sagar University, eminent scholar of Buddhism. Professor Ranjit Ghosh, Professor M.K. Singh, HNBU Srinagar, Professor Mohin Mohammed, GM University, Sambalpur, Odisha, Dr. Lakshmikant Padi, North Bengal University, Professor Adarsh Palli Natraju, Assam University. We are fortunate to have you. Now I would like to request Professor Asha Mukherjee, Vishwa Bharati. She will deliver a lecture on Daya Krishna on aesthetic experience and abhyas, a critique of Bharat Muni's Rasa theory. Asha ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Most welcome, Ashaji, most welcome.
Shall I ask one question to Professor Daniel before Asa starts?
Sir, please keep it brief. Okay, sir.
Yeah. It's a very single line sentence. Actually, I am a fortunate amongst the fortunate few who have worked with Professor Daya Krishna. And when Professor Daniel said that Dayaji always searched for the cure for the diseases of imagination. Actually, that is what was the aim of philosophizing, which Dayaji aspired throughout his life. But the last thing, when he was associated with Dayaji, we do not know, he can enlighten us on this, that how Dayaji was studying his own sickness. This is the way that you refer to this, I think, that Dayaji was very much trying to study his own sickness. Well, that is definitely an important thing which we all should know. Please enlighten us on it.
Just very quickly, because I'm eager to listen to Asha ji. What I was trying to suggest is that Daya Krishna was not interested in his own sickness. He was taking his own sickness as an excuse to think about the concept of sickness as such. And this I found illuminating. Just one last sentence, and maybe I'll take it forward. Now, as you were talking, I thought that I didn't emphasize the element of newness. I think that one of the key features of Dayaji's writing was to encourage us to think anew. And apropos Professor Sina's comments, a critique of the tradition injects life into the tradition. I think that this was the idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Ranjit sir. Ma'am, please. Ma'am, please unmute the audio. Ma'am, please unmute the audio.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for giving me the chance to speak, and it's such a great pleasure to see everybody around, all my old friends, and also my teacher, Professor K.L. Sharma, Professor Sinha Sahab, and of course my dear friend and Guru Bhai, Daniel. It's such a great pleasure to be here, and as you know, I belong to Jaipur, and I was very fortunate to be a student of Daya Krishna right from 1977 onwards. So I have really seen those glorious days of Jaipur, Rajasthan University, the glorious days which Arvindji has talked about. And I was also part of these philosophical kind of enterprise and philosophical yajna that was started by Dayaji and Pahi Saab and many more other people. And actually I was thinking about regarding the dialogue which Daniel was talking about. Daniel has missed Badrinarayan Shukla. Actually, Badrinarayan Shukla was the first one who started teaching us on Panchalakshari. And that time we were doing Frege and Russell and Quine and Whitehead and Wittgenstein. And it was Badrinarayan Shukla who tried to bring all these British philosophers' notions into Nyaya system. And he used to teach us Panchalakshani with all this kind of Western background. So it was really an experience. The first one actually who started this, the dialogue in Jaipur, Badrinarayan Shukla was invited to give us the lectures. He was a visiting professor. So having said that, let me come to my topic. In fact, as Arvindji said that, there was no fixed topic which was given to the speakers. And basically he asked me to speak on Dayaji. And since I was working on this paper, I thought maybe I'll share this paper, my thoughts on Dayaji, and which actually had worked a few years back for Jammu seminar on aesthetics. So, I mean, this is basically a kind of based on the critique, as Daniel was saying, that Dayaji always believed in raising questions. And not only raising questions, he has a very, very special style of questioning. It's not simply question, but also very special style of questioning, not even a philosophical style of questioning in that sense, as he said, as Daniel has said, that, very courageous way of, like childlike questions sometimes, which are very fresh, a kind of curiosity, which is actually basic, inbuilt in the personality itself. So regarding actually Bharata's rasa theory, he raises many questions. And although I have not read all the articles as Daniel did perhaps, but I'm basing my presentation on some of his articles, and I'll be referring those articles off and on. So the presentation is basically regarding the Bharata's rasa theory that has been generally accepted in Indian context, according to Daya Krishna, which only applies to various which does not apply to various arts forms and the rich aesthetic experiences. So the first critique, actually, the basic critique is that Bharata's rasa theory does not apply to all the arts forms. It is applied only in one particular context, and therefore it is Indian aesthetics actually is very rich aesthetic experience. For him, the differences of various art forms are of utmost importance. There strongly argues that there is also the history of and plurality of the particular art forms, which also has to be considered. The rasa theory is just incapable of doing this. It is time to forget it. See the language, the strong language. It is time to forget it. It has already done great harm to India, thinking about arts and the effects this has on the creation of artworks in this country. And then he goes on saying, whatever the resistance, cultural or otherwise, the arts and the thinking about the arts has to be rescued from the millennium-long adhyasa, superimposed on it by Bharata's authority and the unquestioning way it has been accepted till now. So this is a quotation from his article, Rasa, the Bane of Indian Aesthetics. This was published in the ICPR in 2004. Now in this paper, first I would briefly discuss rasa theory, because after all, it is a critique of rasa theory. And to evaluate, one needs to know a little bit of rasa theory. So I will very briefly talk about rasa theory. And basically, I will follow some writers like Prabhas Jivan Chaudhary, K.C. Bhattacharya, about whom we were talking, and Radha Kamal Mukherjee. And then the arguments against the rasa theory presented by Daya Krishna are discussed and critically examined by one. In Indian tradition, rasa theory developed by Bharat Muni, which is in the 2nd century BC, rasa is an aesthetic experience, primarily of audience or of the reader. That means essence. It means what is tested or felt. It also means aesthetic enjoyment, referring to the creative experience of the poet and the essence of the totality of qualities that make poem a poem. Rasa in the Indian tradition is not identified with the idea of universal truth or with the ideal of the ideal to be realized. Rasa theory was first formulated by Bharata, as we know, and later developed and enriched by Anand Varman and Abhinav Gupta. In English, two words, artistic and aesthetic, are used in this context. Artistic refers to the act of production, but aesthetic refers to the perception and enjoyment. The term rasa also has various use in various contexts, and its meaning ranges from alcoholic soma juice to Brahma. Rasa also refers to the reader's aesthetic experience, the creative experience of the poet, and the essence of the totality of the qualities which make a poem what it is. Now, what is the relationship between the artist and the work of art created by the artist, or the art and life? The artist is a part of world with his own experience, feelings, and emotions. Due to some emotions strongly felt by the artist, either in mind or materially, he responds to the situation and environment by writing the poetry or creating a work of art called objective correlates, to use Eliot's phrase. It is said that the poet or the sculptor or the painter does not express, he only suggests. And the suggestion is the soul of the artistic interpretation, as emphasized by Anand Varmana. Indian artists suggest rather than depict. So this is a basic difference. Indian artists suggest rather than depict inner vision and experience it together with myth and legend. And the quality of such suggestion is judged by rasa, which in Indian poetics is called alaukika, which does not belong to this world. So the relationship between this world and the other world, or alaukika, which is transcending, I'll come to that later. The foundation of such a view is that the aesthetics value cannot exist unless the individual's heart with good taste transcends to the impersonal delight. So this is what is meant by alaukika. A clear distinction is made between the ordinary life emotion and the emotional content of aesthetic experience. Rasa includes the continuity of the poetic act and the birth of the poetic experience in the poet as a seed to the reader's enjoyment as a tree. Rasa theory was to understand all arts we find in the civilization in its long history, although it was noted in the reflections on Natya, that is play. Bharata discusses other arts, particularly dance. So it's not true that he doesn't discuss any other form, but Bharata did discuss other art forms, like particularly dance and music, where defining characteristics is feeling and emotion. But Natya includes all the forms of the art. So this is his position, that Natya, if we understand and analyze Natya, then other forms like music and dance, they will be included here. So Natya includes all other forms of art. But if all arts are to be understood in their emotional meaning, having their prayojana, that is purpose, it would be a craft and not arts. Following R.G. Collingwood, which is his book in Principles of Art. Art is not just learning the tricks or skills. So actually Collingwood makes this distinction. Therefore, to define it on the basis of prayojana or the purpose, then it will become craft, not arts. So Bharat did not ask what is the ideal seeking involved in the creation of Natya or of any other art. The act of creation that brings the art into being and the object created both are the object of reflection. Is the object created like other objects we know of, such as pot or cloth? These are some of the questions which are not discussed much in the Rasa theory. A feeling is a disturbance as an agitation. A feeling is a disturbance and agitation in the consciousness, the disturbance we were talking about. So it's a kind of a disturbance or an agitation in the consciousness that tends to result in the artistic action. Emotion means to stir and to move out. The emotions stir and agitate the artist and the observer both, but both are led to some action. The observer engages in the imaginative reconstruction of the meaning and identifies with the artist with active participation and enjoyment of the emotions in the heart. There is a presence of emotions, but in the artistic experience, we distance the emotions. They are non-ordinary emotions. They are relished and they help us free ourselves from being a slave of emotions. Ordinarily, emotions generally are chaotic, blind, and powerful. Indian art in this sense is neither naturalistic nor realistic. Yet it has a relation with reality. The fundamental human experiences is in an environment of loka. The main question is how significant is the difference between the various art forms from the aesthetic point of view. From Rasa theory point of view, there's hardly any difference, and all arts are like Natya, that is play. Now this is Bharat's position, and also followed by Abhinav Gupta. The primary aim of art, meaning any art, according to Rasa theory, is to transform and to consolidate the transitory desires and emotions into 9 or 11 major permanent universal moods and sentiments. 2 are added later, actually. That is why 9 or 11. That underlie their abstract, metaphysical, and cosmic character, thus molding and transforming through imagination and feeling and the abstract sensations leading to uniform form. Bharata distinguishes between Lokadharmi, that is realistic, and Natyadharmi, which is abstract, mode of treatment of emotions, stressing the later desirable. So actually, Natyadharmi, which is abstract, is desirable. Thus, abstraction is considered as an essential aspect of Indian aesthetics. So realistic and also abstract, both. Now here, a little discussion about K.C. Bhattacharya. K.C. Bhattacharya, while explaining this character, makes a distinction between the levels of feelings in aesthetic experience. On the first level, no distinction is felt between the enjoyment and the object. and the contrast between the subject and the object becomes obscured. But on the another level, the direct object of feeling is another feeling, a feeling of the feeling. For example, in the case of sympathy or enjoyment of a child or a toy, a child is enjoying the toy, but then when somebody sees the child enjoying the toy and one has the sympathy, so the child's enjoyment with the toy and my enjoyment of having sympathy with the child's joy of the toy would clarify this difference of the levels. The object of my feeling as the object of child feeling are different, and the enjoyment is also different. The second level involves my imagination of a child's fascination with the toy. But the artistic enjoyment is at the third level. So it is neither of the first level nor of the second level, but it is of the third level, which that does not belong to any one of these levels. Some thinkers have argued that the distinctive character of Indian aesthetics is that it is connected with metaphysical and aesthetic considerations rather than religious and theological nature. It is concerned with the absolute reality through modes of feeling and absolute experience, rasa, serene and awesome, charming and repellent. Indian art through sculptures, paintings, etc., aim at the revelation of metaphysical truth and sublimity rather than sensuous delight and realism. The whole process of image making, ritual, and contemplation are linked with the realization of the various life, that is dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. There is a kind of dialectics involved in the human soul, whose enlightenment is understood and realized as a transcendence of the various pairs of opposites, such as compasses and terrific, love and hatred are. All antinomies are resolved in truth, values and sentiments at the metaphysical sphere. By entering into the cosmic plane of life, one realizes the absolute as transcendent, which is alaukika, and universal, which is sadharan or rasa, getting all opposites juxtaposed, a revelation of metaphysical reality by art. An example of proper integration of mind, personality, and society, situating them with the thrill of exaltation, harmony, and rhythm, that is chandamoy, is the function of all true art. Often delight and tragedy are considered as paradoxical, as there cannot be delight in tragedy. For Greeks, life did not make much sense, but tragedy as an art form did. Their tragedy was meant to seek understanding and purpose in themselves, purposeless existences. To understand that need is felt to touch the universality of life. But if we understand the rasa theory, it should be clear that there is no contradiction between them. The poetry creates a world of emotions where the reader identifies oneself by transcending the real life emotions or participating, which are non-ordinary emotions. Drama always gives delight to the spectator, never sorrow. So now I have touched a little bit on the rasa theory, and rasa actually is a kind of personal as well as transpersonal. As we have a little bit, this alaukic part of the rasa which we have talked about. That is what is emphasized here. I'm not going to go into the details because it has a couple of pages I'm going to skip. But then I'll try to point out about a few things like this dual nature, personal as well as transpersonal, process is called sadharanikarana. That is transpersonalization as under this process, and the personal becomes universal. So this by abstraction, the personal becomes universal. And the detachment is also, as we were talking about, the third level. So the detachment from the mundane is also mundane experience is also a necessary part of it, a requirement. On the one hand, the causality of the work of art affects the art in our practical life, and on the other, it demands detachment on the part of the artist. So sadharanikarana, which is universalization, does not require universalization in the sense of abstraction. It must have the potential of being felt by everyone. So this sadharanikarana is the kind of feeling that everybody can can participate in this feeling, who has the human qualities. Aesthetic experiences is the experience of universalized aesthetic object by universalized subject in the state of perfect bliss or ananda due to prominence of sattva. So this actually is this is basically following Radha Kamal Mukherjee, who is talking about the three gunas, and he's trying to relate the aesthetic experience into trying to explain using three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Radha Kamal Mukherjee has argued that the 9 rasas of Indian fine arts have their ultimate derivation from the 3 different basic attributes, that is gunas, according to Indian thought, enter into the making human personality. Sattva, purity, universality, and impersonality, whose expressions are silence, and the compassion, karuna, rajas, dynamic creativity, whose expressions are love, shringara, then veera, and laughter, hasyarasa, and tamas, or ignorance, that is unbalance, and inertia, whose expressions are wonder, adbhut, fury, raudra, and vibhatsa, and awesomeness, that is bhavalankara. One can easily see the Supreme Being as a creator, preserver, and destroyer, and Parmeshwara himself as Nirguna. So this is basically bringing in the spirituality aspect into aesthetic theory. Now, after sort of discussion, this brief discussion, although I've skipped some part of it, let me come to the critique of Daya Krishna. I'm presenting them in the form of the arguments, actually, following his different writings. Argument 1, which I call as argument by radical differences, truth and imagination. And what I mean by this title, you'll understand when I'm presenting this argument. In his article, Art and the Cognitive Enterprise of Man, Daya Krishna argues against the basic presumption of rasa theory and says, there's no unique art but arts. There's no absolute unity of the body of truth, yet carrying to build into unity. He argues taking a clue from Abu Said. He was actually a friend in Calcutta. That there are radical differences between poetry, literature, forms, and other arts more profound and deeper than sciences. We have verbal arts and non-verbal arts. We have representational art and non-representational art. There he raises an interesting question. Quote, if the man was only mirroring the reality, that is drashta or karta, can there be any art in Indian sense? The answer is clearly no. Therefore, art presupposes a being who is essentially a bhokta, that suffers and lives through the pleasure and pain of human being. Yet, art's essentially related to imagination, to unquote. Interestingly, religion forms a substantial part of arts. He grants this. Religious themes form, and most art forms, art and religion, both start with imaginative entities, and both, if they successful, result in their concrete actualization, transforms personality, like the most religions. So this is a quotation from Daya. And let me try to respond very briefly to this criticism. Daya presupposes that rasa theory by definition is not a cognitive or truth-claiming exercise and is just a judgment of taste. Also that rasa is not an objective ascription, truth-claiming, intersubjective, validating without explaining the relation of whole and parts in the context of rasa. I'm somewhat surprised to see his criticism coming from Daya Krishna, being sensitive towards various forms of arts, knowing fully well that the rasa is the total impact of the whole, taking all parts together and not just some parts. In classical Indian music, and any sensitive listener knows very well that each mode played in an artist has an important role, yet the whole raga, the way it is played, is responsible for its rasa. Therefore, after all, the rasa theory is a theory of all these great experiences of arts, and parts are taken together in the context of the whole. Moreover, there is not one kind of truth. There are different kinds of truth in different fields. Depending on the reality of the field, the kind of truth available in mathematics, for example, is not available in morality. If one mixes the fields such as astronomy with poetry, then this creates confusions. Our life encompasses many different forms of reality, and reason should enable us to go from one to another. The language of expression of rasa is an important question, especially when it is feeling and imagination centered. But life experiences are equally important. It is true that it is not an easy task to express what one feels, yet artists try to express what they feel, and art in the best example. All art forms and languages forms are expression what one feels, are expression of what one feels. In creating art, the creator enjoys the work, gets rasa, and as an artist may strongly feel the demand of morality, using the language of art as a powerful tool to convey. The artist is dealing with the life experiences and the imagination ideals, values and oughts. Therefore, moral considerations are always relevant to society for arousing of rasa. Art presupposes a drashta, karta, and also a bhokta, and not essentially a bhokta, as Daya argues. An artist who creates is not only rooted in his life experiences, feelings, in imagination, but also fulfilling a demand and enjoying his work of art. Now I come to the second argument, which I call is that no place for demand in rasa theory. Another article, Dayaji, is titled Freedom, Reason, Ethics and Aesthetics. Dayaji sees the beautiful as a constraint on human freedom. We did talk about human freedom, which is actually one of the most favorite topic for Dayaji. I mean, the kind of compulsive advocate of freedom Dayaji, as he was. So he says that this sees beautiful as a constraint on human freedom, as it is felt fulfillment. It's felt fulfillment. I mean, notice this term, felt fulfillment. So it is not fulfillment, but it's a felt fulfillment. It is a fulfillment which is a demand in the realm of feeling. Again, following K.C. Bhattacharya. Still not much attention has been paid to this. So what he's saying is that this felt fulfillment, the demand for felt fulfillment, has not been paid enough attention by most of the Indian thinkers. So it is a constraint, if it is. It may be called as a demand. He calls this as a demand to be fulfilled. And human freedom is limited by freedom of others, is not won by innumerable. So there are not one, all these freedoms are limited, and they are limited by innumerable people or constraints. So self-consciousness involves the desire to know oneself and also to transform oneself. But how one can transform oneself into what one is not? One has to transform into what one ought to be. So the kind of, I mean, how to transform, that's the basic question. But then transform to what? What you are not and what you ought to be. So these are the two ways of transforming. The basic question is how one can become better by aesthetic experience. So basic question is that how one can become better by aesthetic experience. And what is the meaning of becoming better? That's what we have to look into. If rasa can be taken to mean aesthetic enjoyment in Bharata sense, then can it give us pleasure? John Stuart Mill, the utilitarian talk of utility, quality of pleasures. He talks about quality of pleasures as people enjoy a lot of things, their food, their holidays, their music, their work, computer games, etc. After all, what makes all these activities enjoyable? For Bentham, the pleasure in art is not only more concentrated and intense, but it can be substantiated without loss of more items, affording a lower pleasure, such as art by food that I like. So for Bentham, the quality doesn't matter. It's just a matter of more and more enjoyment, more and more pleasure. But for Mill, it would be absurd to accept that the quality of pleasure alone is the criterion. Instead, he suggests that quality of pleasure should also be considered as an important aspect to judge the higher or lower pleasures. The famous passage we all know, that it is better to be Socrates than a pig. I'm not going into all those details. But then the majority, and he suggests that how do you know that which one is better? How do you know that it is better to be Socrates than the pig? And then he says that it is in his book, Utilitarianism, classic book, he suggests that it's the majority test, that you have to ask most of the people who have experienced that pleasure. So those people who have experienced both the pleasures, only they are in the position to qualify that which one is better. So the majority test, as suggested by Mill, that may only inform that they have performance preference, for we cannot show that fish is better than chicken simply by showing that more people prefer it or prefer fish. The fact that people really enjoy play does not make the dialogue any more sophisticated. Following Mill, we should say that the higher pleasures involve higher faculties, which make them of a higher quality. And applying this to art implies that serious art engages aspects of mind that lighter art or entertainment does not address. Now, following Mill, one can argue in defense of Rasa theory that all great art, literary, music, visual, dramatic, make a considerable demand on us of attention and concentration, whereas lighter art is hardly demanding. This is actually, I'm using Daya Krishna's terms, that in what sense it is demanding. But as far as pleasure is concerned, it is not clear how would it be different to say that higher pleasures would involve higher faculties. Would simply be a stipulation. For example, crosswords. I mean, people really love, especially in newspaper, have this crossword in every newspaper. And I've seen people, enjoying these crosswords. In the morning, people get the newspaper and start working on the crosswords. And as long as they finish the puzzles, I mean, the day does not start. So crossword, solving logical paradoxes, sunbathing or eating ice cream, playing cricket, having a nice drink, a good walk, music in a concert hall, the enjoyment or pleasure in the arts in the whole is the mood of or manner in which we engage. With them, whether as an artist or a spectator, then it is the arts themselves that their value is to be found, and not in the pleasurable feelings with which we are concerned. Now, is this value called beauty or intrinsic feature of the arts? That's the question we have to ask. Beauty is subjective, but it's not merely personal. See, being subjective does not mean personal. As a preference, when someone is fond of something, in declaring something is beautiful, we think we have a reason for demanding a similar delight for everyone. So the moment, when I say I like it, this is personal. But when I say it is beautiful, means that there is a demand that everyone would like it. There will be, and everyone would get it, would be delighted to have a look at it. An aesthetic judgment is thus to be distinguished as to that falls between the universally necessary or logical and merely personal. So aesthetic judgment is neither logical or necessary, or it is neither it is personal. It is somewhere in between. Again, coming back to these three levels as I was referring. So art is not design, nor it is purely fanciful. Aesthetic judgments arises from the free play of the imagination. In Kant's words, as aesthetic judgment is, to quote, disinterestedly free, or to quote, purposefulness without purpose. So this is what art is. When I find something beautiful, it is purposeful, but it does not have some specific purpose that might make it useful to me. Kant postulates a common sensitive nature among humans, which is not the same as shared knowledge about the objective properties of classes like water satisfies thirst. Now this is surely universal in some sense. If this were so, it would lose the distinctive aspect of aesthetic judgment, that subjective freedom, their subjective freedom. But when I say that the flower of cactus is beautiful, I'm not placing it within a general category of beautiful things, as I place water under life-saving things. So when I'm saying that flower of this is beautiful, and when I'm saying that water is life-saving, now, the second one is universal in some sense, but the second one is also a demand on others to find it beautiful or aesthetically pleasing. Therefore, a special delight arises from the free play of the imagination on an object. Now, this object could be a picture, a statue, a poem, or a piece of music, but it could also be a sunset, a mountain. So it's not simply a man-made work of art. It can also be natural beauty. I'm very much impressed by Tagore's natural beauty, as most of you know me, and therefore I thought that the beauty of nature also must be included. So natural objects seem as fitting as objects for aesthetic delight as anything an artist might create. And actually Kant is of this view as well. So for Kant, aesthetic judgment is applicable to both art and nature. It identifies the essence of the aesthetic with the consciousness of the appearance of object, which is to say art appreciation. Art is beautiful only if we are conscious of it. Artistic production arises from a free act of the imagination. While a natural beauty is a beautiful thing, artistic beauty is a beautiful representation of a thing. Beauty is to be valued from its own sake and not to be reduced to something else. Knowledge of practical usefulness, but we need to bridge the gap between the value of beauty and the value of art. Also, the multiplicity of arts forms are left unexplained. If we already have painting, why do we need poetry? So we also need to have this question: if an artist if a painter gets the pleasure and aesthetic experience in painting, why does he need to write a poem? I mean, if that is the case, if these are different forms, then where is the difference? What kind of difference? So if it is the aesthetic, if it's a rasa, then the rasa is actually the universal. Then there are three more arguments actually which I'm going to talk about, but very briefly. I will not try to defend rasa theory, but maybe I'll just present, because how much time do we have? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. So maybe I'll just briefly present Dayaji's arguments and then and just the basic, maybe few lines about the response, and then I'll sum up. So the next argument is no place for plurality of arts in rasa theory. This actually briefly I've already talked about, that Dayaji says that the rasa theory, which he argues in this article, Rasa, the bane of Indian aesthetic, Dayaji notices that art has been identified with aesthetics, and due to its rasa-centeredness, the concept has remained central in all thinking that has never been questioned and criticized or critically evaluated for its adequacy for the understanding of all arts, which the civilization pursued in its long history. At the end of the paper, he strongly, as I have quoted that earlier before, as I have quoted that this millennium-long adhyasa as superimposed. So here, in a way, actually, I've also answered from the rasa point of view that this is basically, if you're talking about transformation and the three levels, if you're talking about, then it is basically rasa theory can accommodate all kind of all forms of arts. So I'm not going to the details of this argument. Next, I would go to next argument. This is rasa theory being human-centered. Let me just check how much. Right. Uh, Actually, in rasa theory, I mean, Dayaji discusses in great. I was talking about this prayojana, which Bharat has talked about, the seeking of some purposefulness and that sort of thing. So Abhinav Gupta raises the issue of Anubhav in Anubhav Bharati, but why it could not be classified as other objects is not discussed. Further, Natya, unlike other arts, has some written text or text to be performed as play. Actor to try to give the living reality based on anukriti, because the person who is actually performing, he is performing the character of some other person, you know. So the person, he has his own identity, but then as an actor, he is also performing, and when he is performing, he actually achieves another identity by the play. So actors try to give it's a living reality based on anukriti. He is copying the character. So by acting, not really copying, but rather acting. Using senses can be seen by eye and can be heard by ears. It has sequence of acts, scenes, beginning and end, rise and fall with opening and closing. But the anukriti based on real life would not seek rasa. If it is just real life anukriti, then it's not rasa. How can anukriti be understood as reality, which is not? It is copy, created, which is anukriti. Anu means which is after, and kriti, which is created. By definition, is which real life looks like reality, but it is not. It is adhyasa or aropit reality, superimposed reality. People accepted this rasa theory, believed in it, and lived their cultural life within Indian tradition that validated itself. The subtle inter-influencing of art and life has seldom been reflected upon. This is actually the criticism which he is presenting. There are arts which have nothing to do with human situations, and Bharata's theory cannot be applied on them in principle. So this is the kind of criticism I'm talking about, human-centeredness. The loka constituted by human beings is not only feeling-centered, but also centered in knowledge and action. Now, I'm not really going into the details, but I'm coming to the comments which I would like to make. In a play, actors have to depend upon a script, and yet the artist finds scope in the realization of work that relate to certain aspects of drama. The plot, the dialogue, and the number of characters are all laid down by the playwriter, but the characters remain incomplete. It is the task of the actor to complete by their play on the stage or the screen. Traditionally, in Greek tragedies, actors used to use mask, maintaining the difference between actor and the part they played in the play. But in modern time, masks are no more used. In such case, the actors has to fuse their own person with that of an imagined or whose part is being performed. During the performance, the actor must be the character. The actor must be that character which he's playing. Still, in one sense, character is not a real person. And the actor is, in rasa theory, it is called anukriti. For the audience, the actor is an image, a product of Othello. The actor realizes a whole personality, an imaginary person. In fact, there's always a balance between a person and a non-person. So here, it's a person as well as a non-person. So this, the aspect of human experience that we explore with the assistance of great music. So this is happening in play, but also in music, is not that of emotional or intellectual life, but the experience of hearing itself. Active listening with passive hearing is an aspect of self-consciousness that makes human existence what it is. Rasa can only be enjoyed by human, and only human beings find the loka, including the artistic work, beautiful. If Mozart died in infancy, nobody would have composed the magic flute. The work of art are created by the artist himself and enjoyed by the audience. Therefore, rasa theory has to be human-centric. That's the kind of point I'm taking. So artistic enjoyment is conceived not merely as a free from the integrity of fact, but as realization of an eternal value as an identification with the aesthetic essence without loss of freedom. So this is actually KCB. Uh, I'm quoting from KCB. So the formal characters like symmetry, unity, harmony, varieties that ordinarily taken to constitute beauty do not really make a painting beautiful or work of art beautiful. It is the institution. It is the intuition of the artist and the artistic feeling that make a work of art, and there's no such thing as beauty in the object that determines the aesthetic feeling. Therefore, there he raises this, that it is a human-centric, but it has to be human-centric. The next is regarding argument. The next argument is argument 5, that is argument from the uniqueness of art. Now, this argument he actually is presenting in another article. What is the name of the article? This is another article which is reality, imagination, and truth. The aspect of human experience that we explore with the assistance of great music is not that I've completed. The uniqueness of art lies in the universality with the individuality, reality with imagination, objectivity with emotion, and feeling, transcendence with human experience, a way of reconciling all contradiction in rasa. So can all these contradictions be reconciled in rasa? That's the question which Daya is raising. Now here too, I mean, as I have argued by defending rasa theory, that imagination is not a fancy or whim. The more imaginative the photographer is, the more he or he is likely to select a point of view from which, left to our own devices, we would never see the landscape. A photograph of a landscape can highly be imaginative, but not in the way of photographs of fairies in the garden. The comparison between a map and photograph can show the contrast between the reality and the imagination. No doubt imagination is needed in science and history, but still there remains a difference. There is a structure of reasoning by which it moves from premise to conclusions, but in work of art, we do not have this. In the paintings, the painter determines how we see the objects in the picture, at least the basic level, the foreground and the background. In this sense, we can speak of works of art directing the mind. There are no proofs, no evidences, propositional truths, but there are many other ways in which they direct the mind, like the rhythm in the poetry, how we hear the line, melody in the music, where the emphasis falls, symphony, spontaneity in painting, etc. In this sense, artistic imagination directs the minds of the readers, listeners, audience, etc. In this sense, there's an advancement of understanding, and understanding requires universals. So in that sense, there is a kind of universal appeal, uniqueness of arts. The last argument is argument from clarity, and he asked the question that when we are talking about rasa theory, in rasa theory, when we are talking about rasa, whose rasa is this? He further asked the question, what Bharata is talking about when he's talking about the rasa, is it actor's rasa or spectator's rasa? He says, to quote, the rasa certainly cannot be behind the curtain. Neither the director nor the actor could have been seen that the way in the innumerable rehearsals that had preceded or feel the impending result of their efforts in that manner. In fact, even the successful enactment of the play would hardly be said to produce any rasa. Now this is interesting. He says, even the successful enactment of play, which hardly be said to produce any rasa in them, unless the feeling of relief, that is all it over, that it was all over, be said to be that. Now it's very interesting the way he puts it, that once the play is complete, most of the people will have the rasa that, oh my God, it's all complete, now that it's all over. And he's talking about actually, indirectly, he's talking about the pain, that the people have to do the rehearsals one after another, hours after hours and days after days. Now, this argument too seems to be unfair criticism, as actors also get rasa in the hard labor they put in rehearsals. The pleasure and pain both are part of rasa. Rasa is all-encompassing. Anyone who has gone through the process as an actor would never agree with Daya Krishna. Yes, the rasa theory applies to the actors and spectators. It applies to the play as written as well as to the play enacted. The concept of Sahradaya, which I have talked about in the beginning, which Daya calls as misleading, is also taken by him in a very narrow sense. It is not just in the sense of responsive or in the tune with what was going on the stage, but using this concept also in sense Daya expects the cultivation of sensitivity, infinite plasticity of emotions and feelings on the part of individuals. One may call this, as Keats calls it, the negative capability, not only essential on the part of the creator, but also on the part of the reader and viewers, with long self-training as self-learning. So to appreciate, to be able to get this rasa is also a part of long training and long self-learning. Sometimes even the possibilities which were not even imagined by the creator or the writer. All this falls under the creative category of Sahradaya and much more. After all, the sensibilities also need training, indeed long training. The greater the work of art, the greater are the demands of sensibilities on the writer as well as on the spectator. The experience and the transcendence both are demands of the sensibilities and part of rasa. And indeed, the audience thus is not raw audience, a tabula rasa, but culturally trained critical judge and performance. Bharata captures all this in this concept of Sahradaya. The cognitive critical dimension and the continuous process of criticality in appreciation, sometimes failing and sometimes succeeding, we can think of innumerable examples. The obvious example that comes to my mind is the play. I'm sort of referring to the play by Rabindranath Tagore, Dakghar, written by Rabindranath Tagore, and its enactment in India and in various countries, including Poland. A doctor prepared about 200 children for death in Warsaw Ghetto in 1940, during the Second World War, in his orphanage. Kalidas, I think, let me conclude this by saying, maybe I can skip that part and let me conclude. Daya's classical style of philosophizing is also exemplified in the field of art and aesthetics. I think this, at least I have tried to give some glimpses of his critical style in the field of art and aesthetic experience through his writings, looking for adhyasa, dilemma, paradoxes, and contradictions in thought. Search for autonomy and purity has been the pure concern. It has been the prime concern for men. But art faces an interesting dilemma, that it is wedded to the sensory felt and lived life of men, but also that it has to please, attract, and entertain, without which it cannot have a life of its own. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Asha Mukherjee. It was a delight to hear you. Now we are open for questions and comments. So, if anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, ma'am, I would like to ask the question.
Yes,
First of all, I want to express my deep sense of gratitude for delivering such a wonderful lecture. Basically, ma'am, I am from Meerut, from Daya Krishna, but city, ma'am. So I have reservation to ask the question. So
No, go
I
ahead.
was expecting. So basically, I was expecting discussion on his notion of philosophy. I would ask, first of all, I have two questions. One question related to meta philosophy, which is basically based on all the lectures given by Daniel sir, comment by R.C. Sinha sir, and also by you. Ma'am, I would like to know, we know one association of Daya Krishna sir.
Can you please
that he-
restrict the question to the topic?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In a brief line. We know that Daya Krishna sir associated philosophy with cognition par excellence or with conceptual analysis. But ma'am, is it a limited conception of philosophy? Because when we try to understand philosophy in its historical development or in the cultural development, right from the Greek to the modern time or in Indian philosophy, we find that philosophy is not like that. Ma'am, I want to know that when philosophy is
We
quite
will take
different
this
in
question in the end as it is not related to Asha ma'am's topic. We can answer
Okay,
it
ma'am.
later.
Okay, so
At the end.
my
If you
direct
have any
question
question
to
related to directly to Asha ma'am's topic,
okay, ma'am. To Asam, and my question is that if we classify aesthetics into two parts, one is positive aesthetics and second is negative aesthetics. In positive aesthetics, we can put the Rasha theory, but ma'am, what about the notion of vairagya or those who affirm suffering as a way to liberation or to attain the highest form of freedom? So how would you defend your theory of Rasha in front of vairagya, which is very much affirming in Indian context, or those who affirm the suffering as a way to freedom or to the highest form of freedom? This is my second question.
thank you, sir. Asha ma'am. Please unmute the audio. You are not audible. Yes.
Yeah. Was this Amrit Tripathi? I couldn't see his name.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Amrit. But in fact, the first question is not related, but I'll be happy to answer that at some other point because the time is really limited. The second question is regarding the positive aesthetics and negative aesthetic. I don't know whether we would classify positive aesthetics and negative aesthetics. I've never come across this classification, but I think what you're trying to say is that aesthetics which may have some kind of, like I was talking about the demand, like even the demand could be a demand for beauty, demand could be demand for morality. And in that sense, of course, every art form has some kind of demand. And the demand is on the part of the spectator, audience, and this demand actually is, and also some kind of influence which artists actually leave on the sensitive, the spectator. And now this effect, which would be positive or negative, in that sense, I can understand your classification. And if that is the case, then the second part of your question, which is related to vairagya. Now, within vairagya, I don't know, because I did make a distinction between karta, bhokta, and drishta. Now, this drishta, karta, and bhokta, these three parts, and as Dayaji was talking about bhokta, because basically his aesthetics is in the field of feeling, that feeling of pleasure and pain, or being able to appreciate the beauty. So it is the bhokta aspect of life, which is actually the feeling and emotion, imagination. That's the part of the character, which is the human character, which human aspect through the consciousness or transcendence that he's talking about. Now in vairagya, I don't think we have any one of these things. Even as a drashta, perhaps, if you look at the various systems of Indian philosophy, the vairagya, the notion of vairagya is actually against the bhog. So the drishta part actually is more important rather than bhokta part. So therefore, I'm not directly answering you, and I'm not very clear about your question itself, but I've tried to answer in some way if that might help you. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would also like to welcome Professor Ahin Punya Mitra, MUC College, Bardhaman. So there are any more questions, we're happy to have them.
Does Roshan generate any kind of knowledge? Does it have any cognitive status? What is your
Can you
opinion?
please raise the volume? You're not audible. Can you please raise the volume?
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Does Roshan affect any kind of knowledge? Because it affects communication. And communication is one of the characteristics of knowledge. What is the opinion of Daya Krishna? Once he said that it does not have any cognitive status. But sometimes we do not verbally utter many things, but yet communication is affected. So as communication is affected, and communication is affected at three levels, between the creator and the receiver, between the players, and also a tune is set between the audience. This is called the Sarva Samajikanam Ekam Janata. Between the creator, the reader, the artist, and the audience. So a kind of communication is affected. Now, my question is why this kind of state, mental state, it should not be denoted as a state of knowledge.
I guess during my presentation, I did talk about some kind of difference between the knowledge or the reason part, and the other is the realm of feeling. The realm of knowledge, the realm of feeling, and the realm of action. Now, the realm of feeling and the realm of action, these are basically different from the realm of knowledge, from the realm of feeling. The realm of knowledge and realm of action, they are different from the realm of feeling. That's the position actually Dayaji is maintaining. But then the concept of understanding is actually underlies in all the realms. So it's a question of which becomes prominent. So when we are talking about feeling, for example, in aesthetic experience, it's not that the realm of understanding is not there. It's not that the realm of cognition is not there. It's not that the realm of reason is not there. But then in the field of feeling, the realm of feeling, the action, and as we have talked about demand, which means that it demands some action. It demands of a value, what we ought to be, we ought to become, we ought to gain, we have to reach to. So these are the demands. Now the realm of demand actually works in the realm of action as well as in the realm of value, and also in the realm of knowledge. So the understanding part, it's a question of which gets prominence in which realm. But these three realms are different in some basic sense. Now this is actually, the paradigm actually is following Kant, the three critiques, Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram, we have in Indian tradition, and in Western tradition we have Kant, where we have critique of reason, critique of practical reason, and critique of pure reason, practical reason, and judgment. So this is basically the kind of framework in which Daya Krishna is also talking about. And therefore, if we understand this, so which does not, even for Kant, for example, the realm of judgment is the aesthetic judgment is the realm where you don't have the antinomies like we have in the realm of pure reason. But there are, pleasure and pain, both these, they are contradictory. But pleasure and pain, they both give pleasure. They both give aesthetic experience. They both give rasa. So in that sense, the whole antinomy actually, the contradiction, which looks like a contradiction, the experience of contradiction, which we find in the experience realm, that gets resolved in the rasa, the aesthetic experience. And then, therefore, because it is aesthetic experience, but that is the the primary in that realm. It's a realm of feeling. And actually, Daya Krishna, I find Daya Krishna, Kant, and KCB, all the three are working the same framework. And I find all the three of them very, very similar, working the same thing, same lines. Their language is different, their framework is different. But basically, these three realms they are distinguishing, and they're talking about primary and, which gets primary, which becomes primary in which field. So I think surely, there's a cognitive status in aesthetic experience. So it's not that they're saying that there's no cognitive, but the cognitive experience. I've talked about the training. I've talked about the training and learning. To be able to appreciate. If the person who's not exposed to any kind of training, your eyes, your sensitivities have to be trained or to be able to appreciate a good painting. If you have not seen Van Gogh, for example, you have not seen other painters, you will never be able to appreciate Van Gogh. So you have to have some kind of training of painting, and that actually the learning process, surely, it's a part of some kind of cognitive enterprise that has, but at the same time, it also has to have some contemplative aspect, the transforming, the transcending aspect. That not only this particular painting, but also you should be able to learn, you should be able to differentiate, appreciate Van Gogh and also Satyajit Ray, for example, at the same time. The painting of Rabindranath Tagore, they are so different. They're so much different. There's hardly any commonality, there's hardly any similarity. Yet you should be able to appreciate the differences and also the painting as such. So definitely there is a cognitive enterprise.
In fact,
Thank you, Professor Mitra.
May I raise some points?
Professor Asha Mukherjee.
Can I raise one question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
Actually, I must congratulate Ashaji, Dr. Asha Mukherjee. She is always very thorough and academic one. My question is just a comparative one. So we know very authentic book on aesthetics that is written by Benedetto Croce. So his conception of aesthetics and the conception or the view given by Professor Daya Krishna. So how we can make a difference? Because Croce, his aesthetics, his conception of aesthetics, certainly when he talks about intuitive metaphysics, his aesthetics, his intuitive experience is somehow sensual one. So in aesthetics, we normally understand there's some sort of sensualities there. So can we work out the distinction between Croce's standpoint and Professor Daya Krishna's standpoint on aesthetics, number one. At the same time, we have to think about the aesthetic stipulation of Rabindranath Tagore, and can we make a distinction between, you have mentioned also sometimes Rabindranath Tagore. So if we compare and contrast, as you say, the last line that we can make distinctions and differences between, so that cropped that rather stimulated me to raise such questions. So if possible, can we make, and you can throw some light, that is not any question, but I want to be enriched by your reflections. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sinha, for bringing in this comparative aspect. In fact, today I've not really talked about Krishna's own view. It is basically, I mean, like he was criticizing Rasa theory, and through criticism, some of his views actually were coming out, and I was referring to. So, what is Daya Krishna's own position on aesthetics? That perhaps one needs to work out. But I mean, basically, as we have said, the Daya Krishna was more interested in the questions, and not so much in the answers. Answers are always tentative, and if you go through these articles, you'll see that most of his answers the questions which he raised in one article, he is not raising the same question, although they are related to the other, which he's raising in another article, but they are not the same questions. They are related to each other, but they are different questions. So, I mean, who's Rasa, for example? This question, the spectators or the artist. Now, when Bharat is talking about Rasa. Now, this question actually he's raising in one article, and the other one actually is talking about the impact of Rasa theory in general in Indian scene. So it would be a very interesting kind of task to work out actually there's own view on aesthetics, if at all he has. I'm not sure if he at all has his own view, but he's more interested in the questions, as I've said. But yes, I mean, he was also very much impressed by Croce, although he never refers Croce. But this intuition aspect, as I've said, that coming from the Western traditions, the intuitive aspect, the sensibility aspect, the experience, the artistic experience. For example, when someone is seeing, actually, this whole notion of the art itself has gone to so much change that I don't know how Dayaji would have reacted to this, the different forms of art, And there's really nothing common in different forms of art. Yet we are talking about artistic experience. I mean, like recently I have seen, I was seeing one video where there are, in fact, I wanted to talk about that, but I really didn't have much time. There are so many art forms used by science and technology. Recently in Singapore, we have this scientific, different kind of scientific techniques which are used to create paper, wood, metal, Big Baby is created for welcoming the Olympics. Now, these all artistic forms, they never existed. But then, all these artistic forms are coming, into existence. And you never know how many artistic forms will come into existence in future, because, the new discoveries are really sort of preparing us. There's a tab in Paris, for example. There's a floating tap. Now, tap is continuously running water, but there's no tap. The water is actually falling from the tap. And actually, using the science and technology, this artistic sculpture is used there. In the same way, there's a lady through whose hair the water is falling. And you don't see anything. It's just an artistic work which is done by science and technology. So these are different forms of science and technologies. And unless we are trained in this kind of appreciation, those people who are so much computer savvy and who have been watching TV serials and fantasies and all sorts of, media kind of things which are coming up, they can appreciate this thing. But people like us, in our generations, we have learned about paintings and that sort of thing. So we appreciate that kind of training which we have gone through. So our sensitivity, coming back to the notion of sensibility, how the sensibilities are built, that's a big question. How one is being able to appreciate, or how one is being able to get the rasa of the work of art, that itself is a big question. So, if I'm standing in front of I remember in Sweden, there was in Lund, I was visiting, and when one of my friends said that there's a modern art gallery, so maybe would you like to go? I said, no, I'm not interested in so much in modern art. I mean, I can't really appreciate because I don't have the sense, I mean, I really could not develop that sensibility. And then he almost insisted that, no, let's come. And we went there. And I mean, there was a kind of art gallery, and there were a lot of things, like the thread will come automatically and then it will disappear. You stand in front of some wall, your picture actually sort of evolves and disappears. And then you are formed in different ways and also. So there are so many ways in which art can, so many forms the art can take. And to develop this sensibility itself is a very important aspect of appreciating or rasa or aesthetic experience. And therefore, I guess this question of sensibility is very important. Surely it has a sense experience, sensual experience, which is important to develop. And coming to this next point, that to how to develop, to Rabindranath's aesthetic experience. It's that Rabindranath himself has written poetry. He has plays. He has dramas, dance dramas, Natya, singing, dancing, music. So, he was a master of art forms. So there are so many art forms. Painting, at the age of 70, he took painting. So, he was the master of different art forms. And his aesthetic theory, actually, Prabhas Jivan Chaudhary, which I was talking about, he has a book on aesthetic experience, on aesthetic theory. And he has extensively talked about Tagore. And in fact, Pavitra Kumar Roy, I think he has also written something on that, although I haven't really seen that. But I remember having dialogues with Pavitra on aesthetic theory, on Rabindranath Tagore. So, these are interesting areas which need to be explored. And that, it seems, is the basic purpose of Daya Krishna raising all these questions. That, it's not simply just appreciating rasa theory, but asking questions, and asking questions with the kind of fresh, looking for fresh answers and fresh analysis. So that's the spirit. And it's true that, not much work has been done in the field of rasa theory. So Dayaji is really provoking us to work in this area, and especially Indian scholars, because after all, it's millions of years. Millennium he's talking about, and it's a adhyasa, no doubt, that we are overshadowed by rasa theory. We have not really looked seriously into, but we have not really worked into, and how this can be applied in different forms of arts. That's the question which we have to address to, following Dayaji's questioning. That it's not simply the painting. Surely, even if we accept rasa theory, that yes, it is applicable into all the fields, but then how it is applicable, say, in the case of painting? How is it applicable in the case of, say, for example, music? How is it applicable in the case of, say, different forms of arts, whatever they are? So that's it.
If there are any more questions, I would love to have them.
Can you say something in the response?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Asha. It was a very interesting talk.
Thank you.
I have a few points. First, it was interesting that you added art, because I think that most astonishing about K.C. Bhattacharya and Dayaji is that when they write on aesthetics, it is aesthetics without art. If you remember KCB's paper, The Concept of Rasa, he speaks of 3 levels of emotion, and the examples are grandfather enjoying his grandson's playing or something like this, for Daya, the most beautiful form of art is the philosophical argument. So I
Right.
think the
Yeah,
art
I
of the
wanted to mention that. Art of conceptual. Yeah. Art of the conceptual. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that it was beautiful that you connected Tagore to Dayaji's discussion. Then I wanted to say that one part of Dayaji's critique of the Rasa theory is the reduction of aesthetics to emotion alone. And again, we come to the question, but where is politics? Where is society? Where is ethics? Dayaji was interested to work on the borderline of aesthetics and ethics. And therefore, the reduction to emotion alone was not enough for him. Another part of his critique was the subjectivism of the theory of Rasa. The fact that the object, the artifact, the object of art is just an instrument to create something in our consciousness. And I thought that you would enjoy, we can rephrase Dayaji's title for the Rasa article. We can call it, Asha, the object is freedom. What do you say about the object is freedom? The ultimate answer to Casey Bhattacharya. One more thing that I wanted to say, you appropriately asked whether one theory can be applied to every art. So in this respect, I wanted to mention Mukunji's work on music. I think that this is what Mukunji was trying to figure out, whether the Rasa theory is applicable to classical Indian music, which is not representative. And in this respect, I think that his answer is yes. And he was drawing mostly on Ananda Vardhana's notion of Vyanjana. So Mukunji's work also deserves to be taken into account. My final remark is about Amrit's question about Vairagya. I think that it is actually a question about the relationship between Shanta Rasa, which is Abhinava's edition, Abhinava Gupta's edition, and the previous 8 rasas that you mentioned so well. And this is a very interesting question that Dayaji discusses in his rasa article. So again, I'm inviting Amrit to take a look at the article on the Daya Krishna website. Thank you so much, Asha ji, and thank you everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Daniel, for making these comments. I really intended to work on Mukundaji, but actually I didn't have the book, so I couldn't write on that. But I do know that Mukundaji has complimented on Rasa theory. So I have to include that too, maybe at some other time. But then art of the conceptual, that also I had this in my mind to talk about, and actually in my paper I have talked about. So the concept of art actually is for Dayaji is and the creative philosophizing, the notion of creative philosophizing. So the creativity, which is the essence of art and aesthetics, that creativity actually there is finding even in the conceptual domain, and therefore this art is for him is not simply. So the rasa actually is also present even in the conceptual kind of enterprise for Dayaji, and therefore the notion of rasa is so much widely used and and is used in the rasa theory itself that perhaps that should be applicable even on the conceptual art. That's my position. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. If anybody else would like to make a comment or have a question for both of our speakers. Anyone? Okay. Now I would like to request Chairperson Professor R.C. Sinha for a final brief concluding remark on today's discussion. Professor Sinha. And I would like to request Professor R.C. Sinha.
Please, I offer my. I was a participant. So at last, whatever I have to say is, I have already said. But since you have requested, and I am a very obedient one, and I follow the decorum. So it will not be a presidential address. It will be just some observations, and actually my job at this stage is only to congratulate you and thank you because you have initiated the philosophy studies circle in Jaipur with under the collaboration of the ICPR. So naturally, ICPR has got two objectives. Just to start a study circle is not a new venture. Earlier also, we had some study circles, but this has been started under the resolution of the ICPR, and we are going to establish it in each and every university, and Jaipur is the most active one, and it has got some philosophical perspective. So that's why I feel pleasure, I congratulate, and moreover, I got the opportunity to listen Professor Daniel and Professor Asam Mukherjee, and they are very much associated with Professor the literature and the person Professor Daya Krishna. So actually philosophizing is, I think, is not an abstract conceptualizing one. One should know the person also, and then you can develop a better philosophy. So The Art of Conceptualizing is a very good book that requires to be studied. So the scheme I must spell out. The scheme is that every month you can invite one scholar or two scholars, and the question answer session, that is much more important. One can initiate the talk. You can give the theme. So today you have given, we have discussed on philosophy of Professor Daya Krishna, or Daya Krishna on philosophy. So that is the scheme, and in very many places. The second objective is that it is not meant only for those who are working in the campus. There are many scholars who are retired, and the scheme of the ICPR is to involve them also. For instance, in Shanti Niketan, Professor Asam Mukherjee is there, and she is, of course, she is retired. I am also a retired teacher. So this philosophy study circle attempts to involve and utilize. Utilization is not a very happy expression, but I am utilize the knowledge of our very senior teachers. And under the banner of the study circle, especially in this Corona period, we have done a very good job. ICPR had been very active, and I do not compare to other institutions, but I know that ICPR had been very vibrant in this Corona period when everybody is shut within the four walls. So naturally, I congratulate the organizers. I congratulate Professor Daniel, and I invite him also. So not only on Daya, but on any topic which you are interested, we organize in the academics center. But you have to communicate. Either you communicate to Professor Arvind Vikram Singh, or you communicate to Professor Asa Mukherjee. She is a very much part and parcel of the ICPR. So we can arrange it in the academic center of Lucknow. So that depends upon your choice. The offer is there. So I as being the president or the chairperson of the ICPR, I offer you that whenever you feel free and you just intimate the topic, we will arrange, because regular philosophy study circle meeting is being conducted in ICPR Academic Center Lucknow. Because of the corona, it is difficult to be physically present. The deliberation is certainly of a good standard. I again congratulate the organizers and the senior teachers of the Jaipur. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor R.C. Sinha. Now I would like to request Professor Arvind Vikram Singh, Head of Department of Philosophy, University of Rajasthan, to give a vote of thanks.
Unmute yourself, please. Arvind ji, please unmute yourself.
Please unmute.
We have approached the end of today's webinar. We had a great talk and discussion on certain aspects of Professor Daya Krishna's thoughts. I'm sure the unconventional and contrary thinking of which Dayaji's stood will inspire us, and that we all have benefited from the talk. Though the debt of the great philosopher and philosophy scholar cannot be discharged, yet a formal word of gratitude is in order. To begin with, I would first extend my gratitude to the Council, the Indian Council of Philosophical Research, for granting us the study circle program. I am extremely thankful to Professor R.C. Sinha sir for his consent, encouragement, and also for the word of wisdom on contemporary Indian philosophy and the relevance of philosophy. We are thankful to Professor Daniel Rawe for the superb introduction to Dayaji's philosophical project. I'm sure all the scholars have got enriched by the talk. We are yet again thankful to Asha Dede for exposing the nuance of Dayaji's idea of rasa and Indian aesthetics. It is actually quite improper for me to thank both Asha Didi and Daniel Bhai, as both are our very own family members of the department.
Sure.
Let me also take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Dilip Kumar Mohanta, Professor Ambika Dadji Sharma, Professor Pradeep Gokhale Saab, Professor Adarsh Palli Nataraju Saab, Professor Mohin Mohammad Saab, Professor Ranjit Ghosh Saab, Professor Arun Mishra ji, Professor Megan Singh ji, Professor Shivani Sharma ma'am, Professor Lakshmi Pandey, Adhi ji, Professor and Dr. C.B. Sharma Saab. We are thanking these and other great scholars of philosophy for taking out their precious time for the event. I am personally thankful to Professor K.L. Sharma sir, our senior most guardian, and Professor Yogesh Gupta ma'am for their presence. In the We thank the faculty member of the department and the research scholar of the department, one of them, Sri Jiten Chalula, anchoring the webinar. We are thankful to all of you. We look forward for further talk and discussion under the study circle program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. It has been such a great pleasure.
Oh, we can now leave.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.